I am super happy and excited to see all of y'all here. And feel free to greet each other if you'd like, anyone you haven't seen so far this morning or things like that. Alan, I appreciate the thumbs up very much. Just try, we're going to use all of the Zoom techniques and tools that we have. So, Richard, how is your ankle or your foot?
There. They took the cast off on Monday. So
Okay.
I'm in a boot with my walker for like God knows how long.
Oh, okay.
But, well,
Okay.
as well, thanks for asking.
Of course. Hey, Aaron, and Larry, and Paula.
Hello.
But Aaron, you first.
Shana Tova.
Shana Tova and Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
I was very impressed with the Torah service, how you got all the kids to say the prayers together, and the family was wonderful.
You know what? So it's really, and I think I said this at the check-in that we just did, so please forgive me if you heard this already, but the Goldsteins, Zoe and Zach were the very first B'nai Mitzvah who had to deal with questions about pandemic and COVID mitzvah, and it was a very difficult decision for their family in March, whether or not they still wanted to celebrate being called to Torah or they wanted to postpone. And ultimately, they decided to do a modified version where they were still going to read Torah because it was so important to the kids that they be able to participate in the Torah service for High Holy Days. And so they wanted to make sure they'd been called to Torah, because if you haven't been, then you can't do that for High Holidays, because the Bar Bat Mitzvah is a celebration of the first time you're called to Torah. So we want it to be the first time you're called to Torah. And so...
Were they Bar Mitzvah together?
I'm sorry?
Was there B'nai Mitzvah together?
Yes, they're twins. So,
okay.
So they did it together, yep. And then Max with the shofar at the end. But and having all of the kids on Zoom recite the blessings together, I call it a beautiful cacophony. It's not pretty in the sense of like all together, but it's pretty in the sense of all of these kids together who are connected to each other and to Judaism. So,
Beautiful.
That is what we do. So we're going to spend our time in this next block looking at one of the most famous, perhaps most familiar Rosh Hashanah liturgies, Unetana Tokef. Since we're going to study together, though, I would love for us to start with the blessing for study. La'asok b'divrei Torah is the ending of the blessing with our traditional formula at the beginning. So if you'll join me, I'm going to invite you to all put yourselves on mute for right now. And then as we go, I will give you the chance to unmute yourself. So, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asuk b'divrei Torah. And we're going to do this in a couple of ways. I'm going to actually share my screen. I have the text for us here. But Unetana Tokef, what is it? This is the who by fire, who by water, and the appeal and recognition that we don't know who will be sealed for a year of life or who will not. Now, there are a number of different pieces and approaches to this. Historically, we actually don't know who wrote it. There are different theories about who did, but it's a piyut, or a poem is not the exact translation of piyut, but it's close. That was added at some point to our liturgy, and it at various times either included or excluded as people wrestled with the idea that it teaches that there is this sense of being prescribed either to live or die in the new year. And we're going to look at the text itself. We're going to discuss the implications, and we're also going to very much acknowledge our modern time and the feelings that we are here in 2020, where a whole number of events. We read Who by Fire, Who by Water, knowing that there are incredibly destructive fires burning in the west of our country, knowing that Ruth Bader Ginsburg died right before the end of the year, things like that, that really ask us to wrestle with this theology, let alone the text itself, when it then says that tefillah, tzedakah, or tshuva, tzedakah, tefillah are three things that can temper the decree. So I'm going to share my screen actually, because I have a slideshow that we're going to go through with the text as well as some modern commentary on it. And at various points, I will invite you to share both in the text or in the chat, I'm sorry, or by raising your hand in some way so that I can call on you. Mark, I'm going to definitely need your help because once I share my screen, I can't see everyone the same way. So we're going to do the best we can. If it seems like we're missing you, then send a little chat and I will do my best to make sure you're included. So we are going to start here. And the readings that we're sharing come from our Machzor from Mishkan HaNefesh, and they are attributed at the end. So this comes from Rabbi Margaret Moore's Wenig, or Wenig is probably how it was pronounced. Why do I, for one, want to hear all of Unetana Tokef, not only the comforting parts? An answer comes from the octogenarian violinist Olga Blum, founder of Barge Music in Brooklyn. Olga was once asked by the mayor of New York, "Olga, why don't you put the barge on pillings so that when a large boat passes and causes a wake, the barge won't rock anymore and the piano won't ever roll across the stage during a performance as it once did?" Olga replied, "I will never put the barge up on pillings because all beauty, all art, is in some way a wrestling with impermanence and death. Unetana Tokef is an artistic wrestling with impermanence and death, with deeds and their consequences, with power and powerlessness, with fear and reassurance, with mistakes and second chances." Will somebody read the English here of the very beginning of our text?
Susan.
Let us proclaim the power of this day, a day whose holiness awakens deepest awe and inspires highest praise for your dominion. For your throne is a throne of love. Your reign is a reign of truth.
Okay, so how is the construction of this liturgy? How does it start? What is this appealing to, do you think?
Just how, I would think, just how important this day is. It's a very powerful day. It awakens all of us in our deepest, places of the throne of love, your dominion, all your truth. So it's just very powerful.
Okay, so it's a statement of power and saying, all right, this day is powerful. Now, we might ask, there are two ways we can sort of choose here. Is it telling us that this day is powerful because there's a fear we might not think it's powerful? Or is it acknowledging something that we already feel? Or is it a convincing, just lest you forget this day is powerful? All of those are possible. I don't know if anyone wants to share sort of how you see it. Any other thoughts about the setup as we go into the other pieces of this text?
Very good. Please unmute yourself.
Just real quickly, from the first one, say the introduction, and so let these words of sanctity ascend to you. Well, right away, for you are our God and sovereign. Okay, that's an acknowledgement right there for you are our God and sovereign. And that's very, and I'll use the term powerful. I mean, that's an acknowledgement. It's like in the, if you will, the first commandment or the preamble to the 10 Commandments, you are Adonai our God. I mean, whether that's you want to consider that a statement or whatever, or a commandment as Maimonides did, or Judah Halevi, who did not consider that a first commandment, but it is an acknowledgement. We are saying, I am saying when I say this, you are our God, you are my God, you are my sovereign, and I'm talking about Yud Hey Vav Hey here. I think that's how the whole thing started, and that's, if I don't believe that, that's what I guess I'm trying to say, then I don't believe any of this.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Oh, it's Jennifer. I'm sorry.
I just see it. I mean, it says proclaim, so it's an announcement. I see it also as an announcement to remind us. It says awakens deepest awe. It's more than, it's like a time to slap, slap, slap. Time to wake up. Pay attention.
Okay. So then, oh, sorry, was there someone else?
Nope, you're good.
So then we get into this imagery of God and the courtroom. In truth, you are judge and plaintiff, counselor and witness. You inscribe and seal, you record and recount. You remember all that we have forgotten. And when you open the book of memories, it speaks for itself, for every human hand leaves its mark, an imprint like no other. So I don't know, I would assume that we have at least one lawyer here, but that's just an assumption on a stereotype, so that perhaps is not founded. But anyone who's familiar with a court of law, what does this say or suggest to be calling God the judge and the plaintiff and the counselor and the witness? Ira?
Not a lawyer, but as one of the regulars in Torah study, I think we have seen that as God gave the Torah at Mount Sinai and led the people to the land of milk and honey, and the temple was built, and leaders revolted at certain stages. God acted as the judge and jury and exacted absolute action, including the killing of people that were not accepting of God's will.
Okay. How do we feel about God playing all of these roles? Right? There's a very clear distinction, at least from my understanding of law, between the role of judge, plaintiff, counselor, and witness.
Oh.
Sorry, Kim, did you have your hand up? No, Judah?
Karen and Judah and Karen also.
Okay.
If God's playing all the parts, what part are we playing?
Okay. Yeah. Karen and then Richard.
He's playing all the parts. He's all powerful.
Okay.
He controls everything.
Okay. So the omnipotence of God is certainly evoked here. Richard?
Yeah, well, you're the defendant.
Hmm.
The judge is everything else, which obviously is not the way we normally do things. But what I find interesting is it doesn't really have the notion of preordainment here. It's more that, God is judging you for what you did, not necessarily that you didn't have the free will to do what you did.
Okay.
Which is what comes later when you, in this. How accurate is this a translation?
Great question. In fact, I was just reading the comment that I was deciding whether or not I wanted to share or not. So here, there are a number of ways these nouns, so mochiach is what we have translated here as Mochiach. So Dayan is judge. Mochiach, which is translated here as plaintiff, can also be translated as prosecutor. The commentary that I have, which is a translation part of a compilation, it's actually a book. Larry Hoffman is the editor. Who by Fire, Who by Water. It's part of a series that looks at death in some of our holiday liturgy. Says that we assume all these Hebrew words refer to roles in court, so we try to find similar roles in English, even if there are differences between our modern courts and older courts, meaning that it's hard to find an exact match. So here, mochiach, which is plaintiff, can also be prosecutor. So, that's close. In terms of then Yodea and aid, so Yodea literally is a knower, like Knower, which could perhaps mean an expert witness, and an aid is a regular witness. The sentiment here is connected to Karen mentioned omnipotence, God's all-powerful, God's omniscience or all-knowing is certainly evoked with the use of the word Yodea and knowing. So good question. And as I always like to say, every translation is an interpretation. So certainly looking at the Hebrew can add some more color to it as well. Anyone else have a comment or thought or question about all of these roles?
Can I offer a thought?
Absolutely. I don't know who's speaking, but
It's Larry Landman.
Oh, yep, there you are. Okay, sorry. I had to scroll through to find you. Yep.
That's okay. So in the metaphor, we are the defendant, the individual is the defendant, God is the prosecutor, God is the defense counsel, God is the witness, God is the judge. We did the actions, we know what we did, but it's saying that God knows what we did. And when we read on, God doesn't even have to testify. God doesn't have to put us on trial because God already knows. When God opens the book of memories, it speaks for itself. Everything we've done, everything we do leaves its mark. So it's not saying that we are being put on any kind of actual trial. It's saying that what we do every day is leaving its mark. And that's the important part. I mean, as you said at the beginning, this is a poem. This is artistic. It's not meant literally. And the point is that we write the book every day with everything we do.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. I noticed in the chat, Rob's suggestion was that you only have to bribe one person if God is acting as all of these things, which I suppose would be true, though certainly there is no place where we are encouraged to bribe anyone in our tradition.
Rabbi Amy has her hand up.
Yes, please, Amy. Thank you, Mark.
One thing that strikes me is God is not behaving in a linear way. It's not one thing and then the next and then the next. Instead, it's interweaving everything all at once and getting a huge picture of everything all at the same time.
Beautiful. in a way that only God perhaps is able to do.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. The next part of it. And so a great shofar will cry Tekiah. A still small voice will be heard. Angels in a whirl of fear and trembling will say, behold the day of judgment, for they too are judged. In your eyes, even they are not blameless. So here's Kol Dmama Daka, the still small voice, the evocation of the sound of the shofar. Malachim, the angels even are judged. So what adding this to the image of God as all of those different roles in a courtroom, what do we think? How do we understand this? How does it fit with the way we see this day? Max says the Eternal sees everything and we are responsible. Amy, go ahead.
I think it speaks of equality, that everybody is being judged regardless of their status.
Yeah. Okay, so that it doesn't matter, I think Malachim as an example are intended to be closer to God in terms of their divinity in this, but that even then there's no distinction. In some way what Larry said, that the way that we act each day is a record, and it doesn't matter who we are, but that the same thing applies. Ira, we have an annual performance review, certainly. Angels are accountable. Yeah. So also an interesting, and this speaks to the poetry of it as well, the Kol Dmama Daka, the still small voice. We might also know or understand that in a theological discussion to be our conscience. Certainly it fits with one of the many Jewish theologies of how we understand God, that God can be that still small voice. So I think that it's no accident to be employing that language here poetically, also in contrast to the loud sound of the shofar, right? The shofar wakes us up. It's like announcing presence, announces the arrival of holidays or the ends of holidays, and paired with the Kol Dmama Daka gives us a contrast, and perhaps suggests also that everything in between the most quiet and the loudest can call us to judgment on this day.
Excuse me, Rabbi. Barry is waving his hand.
Perfect. Thank you. I appreciate you, Mark. Go
So
ahead.
thank you. Just for 30 seconds. So everyone's talking about free will, and that's great. I don't want to get into that really, but I do want to get into it with angels. I think everyone here is using the word free will as man has free will. Okay. Do angels have free will?
It's supposed to be just God's messengers. And the answer would be no.
Kathy, what was that?
Supposedly angels are God's messengers. So that would imply that angels don't have free will. And yet, if the story of Lucifer choosing to go to the dark side, to be the dark side, whatever, well, then that implies that angels do have free will.
But if angels don't have free will because they are messages of God, they don't have a choice, in other words. Humans have a choice, but one interpretation of angels, if they are the messages of God, they don't have a choice. And if that is true, so how can they be judged by God if they don't have a choice because they don't have free will?
Okay. We're going to hold on to this idea of free will too, because that will also come into play later when we talk about the decree and how we may or may not soften the harshness. And, it is an assumption to think that everybody believes in free will, which, no, you're not making that assumption. Is that what you're saying?
I do. I question whether we have humans have free will or not. So I don't make that assumption.
Okay, so the question of free will, certainly. Mati says that this poem always reminds him of Mea Sha'arim, which is an ultra-Orthodox community in Jerusalem, just before Shabbat begins, when all the Hasidim are rushing to get ready for Shabbat. So what I think, and Mati, please feel free to expand more, but that this sense of we're all rushing to be judged or to prepare ourselves for the judgment and get things in order, perhaps. Perhaps angels' will has become the Eternal's will, but they chose that. Question marks. Lots of question marks. Any other comments before?
James put in the chat, I do think we have free will, but it is limited.
We're going to get, I think, to free will. Here is an interpretation that, I don't have the citation here, but I can find it because it's in our Masor. Listen, a still small voice within us. Hear now a sudden gust of the shofar. They ask, what are we? And what is the significance of our being in the world? You are my witnesses, says Adonai, and I am God. Which is to say, when you are my witnesses, I am God. And when you are not my witnesses, I am, as it were, not God. How does this poem, this interpretation on the verses we were just talking about, how does it strike you or sit with you or... God needs us as God's partner. Thanks, Mom. And Dad.
Barry?
So there's many I could see there'd be many interpretations of this. Anyone is, they're probably all correct. I think it's interesting to note that in the Torah, and we were doing some Torah study, that it came out in several places that what we do reflects on God, or God considers it a reflection on him. And if that is so, therefore, following that reasoning is that if we don't follow God, what God wants, Israel, the people Israel, don't follow what God wants, then what happens is that is an example to other nations, and the other nations then will start questioning the God of Israel. That is one interpretation, absolutely not the only one, or it's correct, but that is one.
Yeah. And Ira said, God led us out of Egypt to be our God, right? So soon after that, in our Torah, there's a text that says, people are just going to say that God brought the Israelites out of Egypt just to kill them in the desert. That's not a good thing, and not a good message to send. Moses is appealing to God's sense of self in some ways. If God has a sense of self, I don't know. And in an attempt to try and motivate folks to change their behavior. All right, we're going to go back to the Unatana Tokef text. In years past, in the last 5 years, where we've been using this machzor, every year I uncover new interpretations that are on the left-hand sides of the page, and I want to make sure we still get that opportunity, even though our services and our observance of the holiday is a little different this year. So we had the image of the, we don't want to get there yet. The image of the lawyer and the courtroom, and now we get a different image. All who come into the world pass before you like sheep before their shepherd. As a shepherd considers the flock when it passes beneath the staff, you count and consider every life. You set bounds, you decide destiny, you inscribe judgments. All right, so here we're getting a little bit more clear, perhaps, an outline of what's to come. How does the image of a shepherd compare to the image of a judge?
Jennifer.
Well, a judge is looking at the deeds and making a decision, whereas a shepherd is a protector and a guide Of course, a shepherd could also be deciding which one's going to be on the dinner plate next day. So,
okay. Well, yeah, that first idea of protector versus judge, perhaps there's a distinction there. Other thoughts about these two images and them being held up together in the same text?
Amy.
I think they're actually more alike than different from what Jennifer said. They both are looking to protect you. They're, I mean, a good judge would be looking to protect the person before him. And I think that it's not so different at all.
Okay. Richard?
Yeah, I think they're quite different. I mean, to me, a shepherd is taking a bunch of dumb sheep who don't know what they're doing, have no clue about anything, and moving them in the direction that the shepherd wants to go, and the sheep have no idea what they did or what they're going to do or anything else. As opposed to a trial where, you know, you have an active defendant and you're looking at evidence and, you know, God or whoever, the judge is making a judgment.
Okay.
I mean, this is very much more in tune with the notion of, you know, the God inscribes in the book of life what's going to happen to you next year, and you have no say about it.
Okay. Yeah, and right, there's not a wrong answer. I genuinely and generally, whenever we're studying text, there's no wrong answer unless you find Jesus somewhere. Then that's a wrong answer in Jewish tradition. But other than that, there is not, and that these interpretations can both. There are similarities and there are differences. And Richard, I think, you know, knowing that that's exactly what's going to come next is an interesting take on shepherd and sheep. Although I also am not an animal cognition person either, but do sheep know what they're doing? Do they know where they're going? Like, I don't know how sheep think. So,
I mean, just one other thing. If you look here, it says, you know, you decide destiny. It's talking about the future. Trials are always about the past. And what you've done, not what you're going to do.
Ooh, I love
Unless you're seeking an injunction, but that's not what they're talking about.
Okay, beautiful. And I see Rob saying that before in the judge metaphor, it was the individual being judged. This refers to the group or the flock. I think that's right. And throughout our high holidays, we see individuals and group. Like when we confess our sins on Yom Kippur, Ashamnu, Bagadnu, Gazalnu, it's plural that we did it. And then there's also the individual repentance, so that there's an element of both. When the shepherd sleeps, the sheep wander. Okay, so that if the shepherd is not guiding, then the sheep may go astray. All right, so you inscribe judgments. Here are some of the judgments. Who by war and who by beast, who by famine, who by drought, who by earthquake, who by plague, who by strangling and who by stoning, who will rest and who will still wander, who will be tranquil and who will be troubled, who will be calm and who tormented, who will live in poverty and who in prosperity, who will be humbled and who exalted. Here's the list. What do we think of this list? How do we understand this list? are we trying to be one or the other? Do we have a say? This is sort of the meat of that decree.
Jennifer.
I've always been troubled by this because then it goes into the quandary of, this is a good person, this has always been a good person, why did something so terrible happen? And or this person has done nothing wrong, why did they have to get killed by a lion or whatever? Why does somebody have to be troubled with possibly mental illness or just things on their mind that they can't get rid of when they haven't done anything to seemingly deserve it? So I've always been troubled by this.
So that this, and you're right, and this is part of the reason that in various times over history, this whole poem has been taken out of the liturgy. Maxine Carr.
Maxine, please unmute.
Sorry. To me, this is startling. It's timeless, and it kind of makes you wake up, and it is, I would say it's more sobering than it's scary, because in the end, sorry for the for the telling it, but in the end, we can soften this divine decree. So I find this the most powerful part of the sermon, of the service.
Okay.
Judah?
Aside from the part that talks about who does not survive, the second part talks about how people are affected in life, either tranquil or wandering or calm or tormented. In that part, really, if you think about it, we're affected by all those ways. It's not just one. In our life, there'll be times we'll be calm and times tormented. We might be in poverty or prosperity. So these change throughout our lives for many of us. It's not stagnant. I'm just realizing that we're made up of more than just one of the decrees.
Yeah, I love that. And you know, I'm realizing too that we often stop with who shall live and who shall die, right? That's the summary of it. But when we're actually looking at it, you're right that there are a lot more pairings of things that we very easily go between on any given year or even potentially day. Richard.
And today, for example, in today's situation, people are dealing with the plague in different ways. Mm-hmm. All of us struggling in some ways, but some struggling with calmness and some by being tormented. And that changes over during the time of the plague as well.
Absolutely. Richard.
Yeah, I was going to say that the problem with this is not that these types of things happen to people.
Okay.
You go from one to the other. The problem with this is that there's a decree. That God is choosing this as if the people who died from the virus were chosen by God to die, and the people who died in the Holocaust were chosen by God. And I just find that unacceptable. I mean, it's just not, a theology I can buy into.
Yeah. I'm with you. And ultimately, we're going to get to the question of, okay, if this is troubling, or we are troubled by certain things, how do we then still include it meaningfully in our worship? And one of those ways is this studying of it and raising the questions, but we'll come back to that. Ira, I see that your hand.
And actually, Rabbi, Barry had his hand up first.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay.
Just real quickly, I don't want to really, really get into anything, but it's what this is coming down to. And actually, Rabbi, you said that you might have a separate study on this sometime. I did. Who is my God?
Yep.
What do I believe? What do I believe what do I believe God is? What do I believe about God? And I'm sure that there is no right or wrong here, but ultimately I think this is what all this discussion is going to go to. And whether you believe in the God of the philosophers, you believe in the God of Maimonides, we can go on and on. So that's where it's coming, and that's all I'd like to say. That's where all this is going. Thank you.
Ira, was Ira next, Mark?
Yeah, I would just add to Barry and Richard to the and Judah, the sense is then what do we do about it?
Mm-hmm.
This all lays up a challenge. Now, we don't want any of this to happen. In the Holocaust, and it shouldn't have happened. And we question why it does happen. But for us, what are we going to do about it?
I offer, this is another modern interpretation. Catherine Madsen is the author of this. The fantasy of the Book of Life and God's judgment is memorable, but the extraordinary aspect of the prayer is its emotional impress. Any of us might die of anything, anytime. When? Now or later? With or without warning? Who by stroke and who by cancer? Who by famine and who by plague? Who by collision and who by explosion? We are grass, glass, shadow, cloud, atom. Oops, I need to move this. Certainly it is imaginary. How else but through imagination do you talk about death in the community where you spend your life? With the people you know, the people you do business with, the people who help you, love you, employ you, exasperate you. Indirection and fable are forms of delicacy. They create an atmosphere in which painful subjects can be raised without speaking of specific deaths that have wounded the people you know. The Unetana Tokef was written in a time when fear and sorrow were closer to the surface of public life than they are now. Debatable, right? But in private life, we still know that security is a thin veneer. God suspends the earth over the void, says a piyut in the Yom Kippur Shacharit Amidah. The Unetana Tokef shows us the thread on which it hangs. So one of the interesting pieces is the assumption, I think, and one of the reasons I chose to include this, the idea that Unetana Tokef was written in a time where fear and sorrow were closer to the surface of public life than they are now. I'm not sure I agree with that. I would love to hear other people's opinions about it. And I have an example that I'm going to share in a moment. This is one of the prayers that often spurs crafting of liturgy, modern day liturgy, on the theme of it. So, Rabbi Dinner talked about plagues and including different plagues. I would like to share this, the Unetana Tokef for Black Lives, in the context of our study this morning. So, each day we hazard our black lives in the court of the white world. We know our worth, yet the white world is judge self-appointed. We pass before you to be counted, 12.5 million bodies stolen, 1.8 million mercifully avoided your shores, stolen land. 10.7 million arrived unsafely, times 401 years, times infinite human indignities, times 3/5 of a human being. We now number 47.8 million. In the morning it is written, and by curfew it is sealed. Who shall die while jogging? Ahmad Arbery. Who shall die while relaxing in the comfort of their home? Botham Jean, a Tatiana Jefferson. Who shall die while seeking help after a crash? Jonathan Farrell, Renisha McBride. Who shall die while holding a cell phone? Stefan Clark. Who shall die while decorating for a party? Claude Reese. Who shall die while leaving a party? Jordan Edwards, Sean Bell. Who shall die while enjoying music? Jordan Davis. Who shall die while selling music, trying to make a way out of no way? Alton Sterling. Who shall die while sleeping? Ayanna Jones. Who shall die while worshiping the Lord? Charleston 9. Who shall die for a traffic violation? Sandra Bland. Who shall die while coming from the store? Mike Brown and Trayvon Martin. Who shall die while playing cops and robbers? Tamir Rice. Who shall die while lawfully carrying a weapon? Philando Castile and Freddie Gray. Who shall die while on the shoulder of the road with car problems? Corey Jones, Terrence Crutcher. Who shall die in the first hours of the new year? Oscar Grant. Who shall die while shopping at Walmart? John Crawford. Who shall die while cashing a check in peace? Yvonne Smallwood. Who shall die while reading a book in their own car? Keith Scott. Who shall die while taking a walk with their stepfather? Clifford Glover. Who shall die while reaching for their wallet? Amadou Diallo. Who shall die while running away? Walter Scott. Who shall die while asking a cop a question? Randy Evans. Who shall die while begging for their life, their breath? Eric Garner. George Floyd. Who shall die by the effects of supremacy, greed, and apathy? Who by beast indeed? But repentance, prayer, and charity temper judgment's severe decree. But repentance, prayer, and charity avert judgment's severe decree. But turning, connection, and giving, these return us to our God. Whose repentance? Whose prayer? Whose charity? Temper, please temper. Temper already. Temper. For sins against God, the Day of Atonement brings forgiveness. For sins against one's fellow man, the Day of Atonement brings no forgiveness till he has become reconciled with the fellow man he wronged. The Day of Atonement brings no forgiveness till he has been reconciled with the fellow man he wronged. When will you atone? How will you atone? For you, like us, will be judged. You, like us, will return to dust. I actually don't want us to comment on that. I want us to sit in the discomfort or the uncertainty of it. And we're going to turn to the piece at the end of this piyut. Utshuva utfila utsadaka ma'arvin et roa hagzera. But through return to the right path, through prayer and righteous giving, we can transcend the harshness of the decree. Tshuva, return. Tfilah, prayer. Tzedakah, righteous giving. I guess my question is, what are these? How come these three things? Why is it that these three things are what can transcend the harshness of the decree? And then the second question is, Ma'arivin et roa gzera. We're not saying it's changing the decree. It's transcending the harshness of the decree. So what's the difference? And I will invite you to respond to either of those. Either why utshuva tefillah tzedakah and why transcending versus tempering it.
Larry, Paula.
So Rabbi, can you actually, translate that sentence? Because, I grew up with the reverse, the harshness of the decree, and transcend is a very different word. Mm-hmm. So what is the literal Hebrew?
Yeah. So the literal Hebrew is not actually Hebrew. It's actually Aramaic, I believe. Ma'avirin. So ever is to cross over. When we read Ma'ariv Aravim, it's crossing over light and darkness. It means to that transcend works, temper works, affect. Remind me what you just said that the language was that you grew up with?
reverse or rescind the harshness of, like, undo the decree.
Yeah. I don't get that necessarily. It's not a word that means change. It means to cross over, or it can mean. If there's anyone who has further comment, I think this is another example of translation being interpretation, because the word itself can mean all of those things with variation, but it paints a very different picture depending on which one you choose. Let's see.
Can you mute it?
I think yes, and I see some people have found the Unatana Toke for Black Lives Matter. I can also share the link here. I think there were a few other people who were waiting to comment, though, on Utshuva Tfila Utsadaka, or transcending the harshness. Is that right, Mark? Were there?
I'm not seeing any hands raised right now.
Okay.
Rob just raised his hand as soon as I said that.
I've sort of been thinking about this. I just am not comfortable with this sort of whole framework of this prayer. I mean, it sort of lays out to me in broad terms, this is a day of judgment. Here are all the bad things, but we're offering you a way of changing that judgment by prayer, righteous giving. It's just, for me, not the reasons that I would do prayer or righteous giving.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And there are other reasons for me to do that other than a belief that somehow it's going to change God's judgment on me. Yeah, it can change my life and make it a richer life, but this seems very medieval to me, and I find a hard time making it fully relevant.
You're right, it is medieval, so I think, again, right, it raises more questions perhaps. Richard, I see your hand. Yeah, go ahead, Richard, actually. We'll comment after. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it is medieval, but it also is fully consistent with the blessing and the curses in Deuteronomy. It's the same kind of theology. And that, needless to say, is very troubling.
Okay. One of the pieces here, oh, no, go ahead, Paula.
I mean, I always struggle every time I read this with what we've all talked about already, the judgment, the decree, etc. But, you know, I think it does give human beings a way to grapple with the randomness that they see in life when, you know, a loved one gets sick or a tragedy happens. And that, not that you have any power to undo it, but by prayer or giving or acting in a certain way, you can cope with it in a different way to kind of make sense of it and give yourself some solace and comfort other people. So it's not going to undo the horribleness that happened, but it gives people tools to deal with it.
Beautiful. I'm glad I didn't say anything because that was the direction I was heading. That it's not saying that you transcend the decree. It's not saying that we can change the decree, which I know, as we've pointed out, like, how do we feel about the decree to begin with is a question. But it can transcend the harshness of it. So perhaps that is looking for, as Paula said, ways to cope. Maxine Carr had her hand up next.
And then Judah.
Great.
Yeah, it is. It definitely is medieval, and it's timeless, because we all have those fears as we read the beginning part of this prayer. We don't know what's going to happen to us. So I find it very powerful. Now, there is one thing that's really true, and this is kind of a petty thing, but through return to the right path, we can transcend the harshness. So suppose somebody is an alcoholic, and if they actually return and try not to be an alcoholic, then maybe all the diseases of the liver won't come to them. So that part is really true. The other part, prayer and righteous giving, not think about that one.
Judah?
Yes, I very much agree with the comment made a couple ago, maybe it was you, Paula. It talked about how it changes our attitude, but also I think our actions change what happens to us, and also how other people are affected by us and how they relate to us. So it doesn't change it completely. I know we were having trouble figuring out the meaning of that Hebrew word, but it does modify it in some way. So I think our actions do affect both ourselves and also what is happening around us.
Alan.
Thank you. One of the things that strikes me about this is, with the victims and the Unatona Teokev for Black lives, it kind of just puts in our face the reminder that we've got a serious breakdown in justice in our society. So number one, it doesn't matter until we fight for equality and making sure that all people are treated equally, number one. And number two, we're all human beings here. And so guess what? That means we're all going to be dealing with something personally, individually. And every one of our community who we love and we cherish, we're going to have to watch them go through it too and be there to support them in some fashion, as painful as that can be and as troubling as that is. But coming to, if we ground ourselves in repairing the world and tzedakah and justice, then we are at least chipping in towards the greater good and towards the coming to peace with the reality of what and the fragility and the painful things of life. And it'll give us more opportunity for the joyous periods of time so that we can recognize how sweet life is and how wonderful our relationships are. But until we get to a system where racial equality and religious equality and gender equality are actually realized, we can all just say, oh, well, I gave my charity, so I should be fine, but that's just not it.
Beautiful. Ira.
Yeah, I totally second what Alan just said, and would only add, for years, I got hung up on this harsh decree thing. And some time ago, I guess I figured out, I don't know what the harsh decree is. So what am I going to accomplish by worrying about it? It was about the time that song that came out, Be Happy, Don't Worry. So at that time I decided, okay, I can't worry about what I don't know. So I'll concentrate on what Alan and several of the others of you said. let's see what we can do about the stuff to support things like Black Lives Matter.
Beautiful. These words come from Rabbi Aaron Pankin of blessed memory, who was the president of Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion, the seminary from which Rabbi Dinner and I were both ordained. Mark, we have 15 more minutes. We might not take the full 15, but we have till 12:30. Rabbi Pankin, aside from being a mentor of sorts to me and someone that I had a relationship with growing up, he died in his early 40s in a plane crash, which is an interesting frame in the context of this prayer and in offering his words that echo much of what has been said previously. Our actions help us live in such a way that when we suffer life's darkest depredations, we will always have ways of coping with them. Our actions may not change the ultimate outcome one iota, but they alter our attitude, bolster our ability to withstand challenges, help us handle unavoidable misfortunes better, and see life's value amid chaos and dismay. Rabbi David A. Teutsch. I cannot control the unexpected blows that will affect my family, my job, my health, but I can control how I live with them. Teshuvah, cultivating a spiritual life and returning to Torah, Tefillah, cultivating gratitude and connecting with transcendent values, and Tzedakah, cultivating generosity and pursuing justice, will mitigate the bad in the decree. Teshuvah, Tefillah, and Tzedakah will not stop stock market crashes, lung cancer, or other blows that come our way, but they can radically transform how we are affected by those blows. 2 ways to say something very similar to what the rest of us have already offered. The prayer then moves into the reiteration of the qualities, the 13 attributes of God that is intended to bring us some sort of comfort. You are everything we praise you for, slow to anger, quick to forgive. You do not wish the death of sinners, but urge them to return from their ways and live. Until the day of death, you wait for them. You accept them at once if they return. Since you created us, you know our impulses. We are but flesh and blood. We who are mortal, our origin is dust, and so is our end. We wear out our lives to get our bread, like broken vessels, like withered grass, like an something that must fade, an oar that must fade, a shadow moving on, a cloud passing by, mere dust on a wind, a dream that flies away. So a reminder to us that Yisodo me'afar v'sofo le'afar. Our dust is our origin and dust is our end. Oh, it's a flower. Thank you. A flower that must fade. There's a teaching this time of year that I come back to each year, that we are taught to have 2 pieces of paper in our pocket. On one side it says, the world was created for my sake. And on the other is, I am but dust and ashes. And this always reminds me of that our origin is dust and so is our end. This is a reminder of our humility. And at the same time, that other piece of paper that we are taught to keep in our pocket also tells us that the world was created for us, so that there's a balance between the humility and the action, which I think has also been reflected in what everyone else is saying. Let's see. Another interpretation that I think adds commentary to some of our discussion thus far. I speak these words, but I don't believe them. The Lord God formed man from the dust of the earth. Clearly, there's no scientific foundation. You know how we are formed. You remember that we are dust. And human beings are the gloriously complex product. Remember that we are dust, of evolution from single-cell organisms. Remember that we are dust. And as for our end, well, no need to dwell on that right now. By the sweat of your brow shall you get bread to eat until you return to the ground. So much to do, and so many ways to keep busy. For from it were you taken, for dust you are, and to dust you shall return. For what would it mean if it were true after all? Rob says, we are stardust, we are golden, and we must find our way back to the garden. So in our journey through Unatana Tokef, we see images of shepherd, images of, yes, great words from a great song, that is true. From the images of the courtroom to the images of a shepherd, to a harsh decree, to varying degrees of a decree, to the way we might temper that decree or affect its harshness. I think we've taken our conversation in many different directions that ultimately lead us to a couple of places. One being, well, who is God? What is God? How do we see God anyway? To be able to determine, does this fit with our theology? Is God more like the shepherd that shepherds a flock of sheep who don't know what they're doing, and who, if the shepherd sleeps, the flock wanders? Is God more like a judge that's weighing our acts and determining our worth by our deeds? Is God rendering a judgment and a decree on when we will live and when we will die? All create their own troubles and questions, and I appreciate those of you who have very vulnerably shared things about how you wrestle with this or it troubles you. And so we're going to close with the question of, what do we do? How do we take this liturgy, this poem, this piece that seems rather emblematic of our high holidays, and recite it or sing it or listen to it or live it out, even when it might trouble us? So the simple question is, what do we do with it? And the perhaps less simple question is, how do we still make meaning, value, worth out of something that might trouble us? Sue.
I think on a simple level, it's telling us that if we follow the three repentance, prayer, and righteous giving, that we can determine our own path in this world, that we can better where we are in God's eyes anyway, by following what's considered important. We can be kind to others and in turn expect some more.
So perhaps at the end of the day, utfila, utshuva, utfila, tzedakah, that's where we can focus our energies in a way that brings meaning to and purpose to the way we act, regardless of the other pieces of this poem.
Right.
Max says, this is where faith comes in. Well, that is a big statement. Would you care to elaborate?
Oh, those are just a few little words with a lot of stuff in them. I think many of us, I would say more likely older folks, have seen things that seemed like just the worst things have ultimately turned out to be the best things. And that to me is part of that. And over the years, there's so much that I can't understand. But when I look back, that other thing that I did not understand, I came to understand later. Okay. I don't think we're blessed to be able to get it as fast as we would like. Certainly I can't. I guess that's oversimplification maybe.
Judah, and then I'm gonna claim the last word and send us on our way.
I'll simply add to what Sue was saying by thinking, I think mostly it affects us. It was those three things that we're doing that seem like they're for someone else, I think have the greatest impact on ourselves.
So my hope is that going through this text, exploring it, discussing it, maybe even debating pieces of it, can add meaning and value to the hearing and recitation of it as we continue through our High Holy Days, through Yamim Noraim, our 10 days of awe. And it will come up again Yom Kippur morning and afternoon. We will hear these words. I am more than open to any kinds of comments or conversations if you have other thoughts to send me them after, but I am grateful for your willingness to show up and participate and bring meaning to something that is part of our Rosh Hashanah experience. There is a chance you'll again have to sign off and come back on to another reconvene opportunity where we'll also be able to see some pictures from those who chose to participate in the scavenger hunt this morning. And then either virtually or in person, whatever you're comfortable with, at 1:30 we will have the shofar service hosted from the JCC. So, Shana Tova, Shabbat Shalom, thank you, and I look forward to seeing you all soon.
Thank you.
Shana Tova.
Shana Tova.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you.